So this is another video on Spartan cultural life for the course Spartan Society to the Battle of Leuctra, and in this one we're looking at Spartan architecture. If we have a look at the syllabus here on cultural life, we can see that there are three listed under architecture: the Amyklaion, the Menelaion, and the Sanctuary of Artemis Orthia, and these are three significant sites in regards to Spartan architecture in this period that we're looking at. However, we're going to add a fourth one to add a little bit more depth to our response, which is Athena Chalkioikos, which is another religious site, which we'll look at a little bit more later. This will just add a little bit more depth and go a little bit beyond the syllabus to maybe differentiate ourselves from other students. These four sites also form the archaeological evidence that we have for the sites, which really isn't much. In terms of the written sources that we have for the time period, or for architecture for Spartan society in cultural life, we have Pausanias, who was a travel writer and a geographer. So he traveled around writing about particular sites and why you should go and visit there. And he was writing in the 2nd century AD, and he describes the buildings and monuments of Sparta. However, because the Spartan period had well and truly finished by the time he was writing, there wasn't much left in remains for him to actually see. So he's writing himself about ruins, and he's drawing from the memory of the local inhabitants to sort of pad that description out, so to speak. Thucydides, another writer, tells us that there really wasn't much memorable in regards to buildings in ancient Sparta. However, we need to remember that he's writing probably more in comparison to other Greek city-states like Athens, who had quite significant architectural pursuits. The first site we're having a look at is the Amyklaion, which was a site dedicated to Apollo and his male lover Hyacinthos, who was killed. The story goes that Hyacinthos was then buried down at Amyklaion, which is that town 6 kilometers to the south of the other 4 villages of Sparta, and where he was buried, that became his tomb, and then above that was built this shrine, and on that the colossal statue of Apollo that we can see here. So Apollo was worshipped here, and this was the site of the Hyacinthia festival, which is where the Spartans process to once a year for this festival to honor Apollo and to remember the story of him and his lover Hyacinthos. The Menelaion is another significant site, and this was 5 kilometers southeast, and this was at the height of Mount Parnon, so it was quite remote. And this was a shrine to Helen, the Helen of Troy from the story, and Menelaus. And we have some significant lead votive offerings that were put there for Helen. And these are mythical figures, so this is quite an old shrine, been there for quite a long time. The sanctuary of Artemis Orthia was probably built as early as the 10th century BC. And at around 700 BC, we have the altar established and the temple built to the goddess Artemis Orthia. And you can see the temple here. So this is the sanctuary itself, this big site here. And then in the middle here is the temple of Artemis Orthia. And this is where we have the stealing of the cheese festival or ritual, which took place once a year, where we have the young boys who were required to run forward and try and steal a wheel of cheese from the altar of Artemis Orthia, and they were repelled back by older boys with sticks and whips and those sorts of things. It was a bit of a violent rite of passage for the young men. Finally, we have the temple to Athena Chalkioikos. It was Athena, the city god. So she was the city goddess, rather, of ancient Sparta. And this temple was established to her in the city, and we can see that down here, right where the city was. We have this statue of Leonidas, who you might be familiar with from the movie 300, and that was located around the same place as well. The colloquial name for Athena of the city was Athena Chalkioikos, because the temple to Athena was supposedly lined with bronze sheeting, so it means Athena of the bronze house, and those sheets sort of had scenes from mythology. So Pausanias tells us it had big bronze gates as well, so it would have been quite a remarkable building. So there's more detail in the iBook, and you will need to know that. Again, going back to the syllabus, we need to be able to identify each of these four significant sites and be able to describe them at depth and at length in any response on Spartan architecture.